Yeah.
That's what I was like, paying over JLC, something international law. It made sense. And I was like, and I looked at
Hi, I think we're about to get started. Thank you for coming today and joining us here in the School of International Service at American University. My name is Carl Levan. I'm a member of the faculty here, and I'm chair of the Department of Politics, Governance, and Economics. And my heart is close to the cause of peace, but new to many of the challenges facing Syria. So I wanted to, by way of a brief introduction to myself and to the panelists and to the way the School of International Service thinks about complex international problems like this, share a few of my own thoughts to help as the first step in shaping some of our conversation. Many of this may be well known to you, but top of my mind is that, of course, 500,000 people have died in the Syrian war. And I remember when the war first erupted, and as someone who had become very curious and somewhat passionate about the Middle East as an undergraduate many, many years ago, thinking how it was really shifting the balance of power in the Middle East. And in the ensuing years, more than 13 million people, of course, had to flee their homes. And with the Assad regime gone, there's a tremendous opportunity for peace. And this is where SIS and the views of the panel, I think, become increasingly relevant and make today's event really salient. There's an opportunity for some sort of power sharing agreement that could perhaps help stabilize the country. But the United States is also in the middle of adjusting its policies, where the EU, the US are also trying to grapple with the status of HTS, which they have all listed as a terrorist organization. And, you know, until recently, the United States had, of course, been reluctant to contribute to Syrian rebuilding efforts. You know, along these lines, during the presidential campaign, President Trump said, quote, "Syria is a mess, but is not our friend. The United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight." There were only about 900 troops in Syria now. And later on in the campaign, shortly after he was actually elected, the president seemed open to the possibility of continuing operations at some level in Syria, especially if it was going to help stabilize the country and to isolate ISIS, which at one point was really a core focal point for U.S. foreign policy. But as a backdrop to that, I think those of us who are interested in democracy and governance and these transitional processes, and this is where there is overlap with my own interests and the work of PGE, Politics, Governance, Economics, you know, one of the key players that I think will be missing for the U.S. engagement going forward will be much of the expertise that was previously within the U.S. Agency for International Development. In the fact sheet published on USAID's website before that website largely disappeared, USAID was improving essential services that benefited over 8 million Syrians, providing clean water, electricity, and healthcare through an economic recovery and support fund. An economic management for stabilization program had helped foster $6.5 million of investment. And then, of course, there was the massive expertise in humanitarian infrastructure, which I think we'll hear an update about and more details about, where USAID's Syrian Humanitarian Office was providing aid to about 800,000 refugees and about 2.4 million Syrians. Syria remains one of the most massively displaced crises globally, with about 7.2 million internally displaced persons, IDPs. And there are still at least 16 million Syrians in need of humanitarian assistance. And so the United States is rethinking how to engage Syria, how to help with stabilization in the midst of its own rethinking about its policy priorities in the region and indeed in much of the world. So I'm really looking forward to listening to this panel that was put together and assembled by my colleague in the department, Professor Yerevan Saeed. He's the Barzani Scholar in Residence, and he serves as director of the Global Kurdish Initiative for Peace. His research focuses on political economy, energy politics, conflict resolution, and of course, Kurdish studies with an emphasis on Iraq, Turkey, Iran, and the Gulf states and the broader Middle East. And for the students in the room, I want to highlight that next spring, he'll be teaching a new course on the political economy of oil and climate change. So if you're a student in global governance, politics, and security, or elsewhere in School of International Service, please check out his new GGPS course in spring 2026. On this panel, he'll be joined by Caroline Rose, who's the director of the Crime, Conflict, Nexus, and Military Withdrawals Portfolios at the New Lines Institute. She leads and produces research at the intersection of defense, security, illicit trade, and geopolitics. She's also served as an analyst at the forecasting firm and publication Geopolitical Futures. And she's briefed allied ministries, intelligence agencies, and diplomats, and authored special reports for the United Nations Office for Drug and Crime. And I'm pleased to highlight that she also is an alumna of the School of International Service. So we're always happy to welcome back our former students, and especially where they've carved out such a distinguished and influential career in a rapidly changing security landscape. Sirwan Kajo joined Voice of America in 2012 as an international broadcaster for the Kurdish service. And he was born in the town of Amuda in northern Sirte, Syria. And he works with VOA's Extremism Watch desk. And I checked this morning and it is still pretty live. And he focuses on Islamic militancy, extremism, and conflict in the Middle East. He's written two books, two book chapters in Syria and the Kurds, and is also the author of a novel set in Syria called Nothing But Soot. Last but not least, we're joined from Minnesota by retired General Joseph Votel, who most recently served as the commanding general of U.S. Special Operations Command in Florida. In his early career, he served with an infantry division in Germany and taught small group tactics at Fort Benning, Georgia, before being assigned to Operation Just Cause. He held assignments at the headquarters for Allied Forces Southern Europe in Italy and the NATO Peace Implementation Force in Sarajevo. Some of his other previous commands include the 2nd Battalion at Fort Drum, New York, small fact where my father served, and also the 75th Ranger Regiment, participated in Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom, Iraq. He served in the Pentagon as a director of the Army and a joint IED defeat task force, and has held a number of positions under the Deputy Secretary of Defense. So very pleased to have this combination of expertise and practical experience coming together with a complex problem to discuss a complex problem that has been changing very rapidly, and really looking forward to learning how Syria remains the key to the changing landscape of the Middle East, and is at risk, I think, of being neglected in the geopolitics today. So thanks so much, Yerevan. Why don't you take it away?
Thank you, Carl, for the introduction and also for introducing our panelists. It's really a pleasure and also an honor to moderate this panel. We have a really great lineup of expertise, diverse, who are going to touch on internal politics and also regional, also international geopolitics regarding Syria. I would like to, give a very overview of what we are going to do. I have a couple of questions for each of the panelists, and then I am going to have one general question for all the three panelists, and then the floor will be open for Q&A for our audience. I would like to give a chance, because we have a large number of attendees, to ask their questions. I would like to go to General Votel for the first questions. General, as you know, there has been lots of speculations and also reports regarding the withdrawal of the U.S. footprint of military, U.S. military presence in Syria and also in Iraq, especially in the last 2-3 months under the current administration. How do the strategic imperatives of the United States in Syria, from counterterrorism to regional stability, geopolitical competitions with actors like Russia, China, and even Iran, justify a sustained American engagement in the region despite inherent complexities?
Well, thank you, Yorban. It's good to be with all of you. I do apologize that I'm unable to be there in person today, but I'm very, very glad to join you for this important discussion on Syria. I think it's a very relevant topic, and I think, as you'll hear throughout the conversation here, what happens in Syria really matters, because as Syria goes, so goes the region, at least in my view. But Yorvan, you posed, I think, a really important question, and I would just note that while there has been a lot of discussion by the incoming administration on potentially moving troops out of Syria and Iraq, none of that has occurred, and I think that's a very positive sign, and I think it's indicative of the fact that we are thinking through this strategy, at least as it pertains to this part of the Middle East, very, 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 very carefully. But to your question, in terms of the strategic imperatives that really compel a sustained presence in the region, I think there are two things that I would point the audience to. First and foremost is that we still maintain, or I should say retain, vital interests in the Middle East. These have largely not changed for a number of decades now, but they are still in place, even as we continue to be more concerned about things out in the Indo-Pacific and other parts of the world. Our interests here still matter, and in my view, I think there's 5 of them that make it imperative for us to think hard about this region and our military and other presence here. And I'll just quickly enumerate them. First is, of course, the challenge of combating terrorism. Obviously, this is what brought us to the region in large numbers after 2001. And oftentimes, when we talk about terrorist organizations, we usually think of ISIS and Al Qaeda, but I think it's important for everyone to appreciate that there are over 20 designated violent extremist organizations across the Middle East. So this is an interest for us. Secondly, we're very concerned about stability. We're talking about Syria. Syria is the country that really threw the region into the lurch a little over a decade ago with the mass exodus of people. You've heard the numbers of internally displaced people and the number of refugees that have moved across the region and into Europe. That's what we're talking about. This kind of instability has the opportunity to disrupt a variety of our other interests in other areas. Our third big interest is preventing proliferation. I think all of you have seen in the newspaper here recently, or in the news, engagements that we had with Iran over trying to prevent expansion of their nuclear ambitions. That certainly is an important aspect, but that has also been a long-term interest. Fourth is freedom of navigation. We're seeing right now us, aggressively defending freedom of navigation and free flow of commerce down in the lower Red Sea through the Bab el Mandeb. So, I mean, that's a long-term interest in the region. And of course, the Houthis, who are our principal adversaries here, have an extraordinary capability to disrupt not just the Bab el-Mandeb, but the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal. So we have to think hard about this. And then fifth and last is influence. And of course, I would just share one statistic with you that would prove highlight the importance of this. Every country in the region, with the exception of Israel, is somehow linked into the Belt and Road Initiative with China. That's what this influence is about. It's about maintaining a positive influence in the region. That has been a long-standing interest for us, and something that we have always paid attention to. So if we're okay with others coming in and exerting their influence in the area, and again, I know we can't always prevent that, but for the United States, maintaining a favorable balance of power and a favorable balance of influence in the region has been seen as being in our interest. I think the second part of the piece here is that the Middle East has to be viewed as one part of a broader strategy for the United States. The current administration has not really yet articulated a final strategy for how it is going to address our security and other security concerns and interests around the world. But the Middle East has to play into that. I've given you one reason already, just the fact that if we are not present, others will fill in the gap. It's important to appreciate that I think that 80% of the oil, 80 to 90% of the oil that Iran exports goes to China. They are clearly invested in the region. It's important to appreciate that several years ago, really just a few years ago, Egypt, about 70% of the military and defense equipment they were buying came from the United States. Today, that number is closer to about 8%. So we have to look at the Middle East as part of an overall strategy for how we protect our interests and how we provide for the security of the nation. So, Yervan, I think those are the two things that I would point to as kind of the strategic imperatives for why we need to remain engaged at some level in the Middle East.
Thank you, General, for the insightful comments really on Syria. Also, I would like to point out, like, recently, Russia appears to be going to come back to Syria. They provided about, I think, $25 million to the Syrian Central Bank. The new president of Syria had a phone call with the Russian President Putin, which was really surprising given all the brutalities of the Russian Air Force against the Syrian people. But I think we're going to touch on that in the coming questions. Caroline, let me just ask you some questions about the Syrian president. Look at the transformation. What a transformation! If you look at the background of Ahmad Shara, where he came from, he was Al Qaeda, ISIS, and now you see him. He's sitting in Damascus. Syrian president. He's trying to be recognized as a legitimate leader. I think he has a good job so far in legitimizing his rule on the regional level and to some extent on the international level. My question is, to what extent he has been successful, effective in legitimizing his role domestically, regionally, also internationally, and also what would be the challenges down the road for his ambition for more recognition and also for long-term stability for Syria?
So much for having me. It's really special to be here, not only because I have been a student within the School of International Service, and I've participated in a few alumni events and I've come back as a speaker, but today is particularly special because I get to talk about this new opportunity in Syria. After being in this room so many times for International Relations Society events and lectures on the plight in Syria, and finally we get to talk about this new opportunity, as General Votel just outlined, the importance of what is happening in Syria and why we need to continue talking about it and stay engaged. Now, when looking at al-Shara's fight ahead, I think that we've seen and we've learned a few lessons in the last few months of not only the reaction domestically, but also, of course, the regional reaction. Al-Shara has a few challenges ahead of him. Number one, whenever there is something that is done to engage with the region or engage with the international community, that isn't necessarily always perceived in a positive light at home. And I think a perfect example of this was when al-Shara in January, right after the offensive, Deborah Tice, Austin Tice's mother, came to Syria to meet to talk about an investigative process into trying to find where Austin was, his whereabouts, and really initiate a process of rescuing Austin Tice. This was a very key move from the new interim government that could potentially pave the way and create positive conditions for normalization, as well as, of course, sanctions relief, building goodwill with the United States government, given the fact that since 2012, Austin Tice, of course, has been missing, and this has been one of the key policy goals for the United States government. Now, this was all happening at a time when relatives of prisoners from Sednaya, as well as relatives of key figures that disappeared across the civil war, they were scavenging to find information to find their loved ones. And there was frustration with the fact that the interim government seemed and appeared to be prioritizing Austin Tice and that effort. Of course, there have been other overtures and other efforts to try and identify missing persons inside of Syria, but I think that highlighted the battle that was ahead for the interim government. You go to a certain conference in Rome or Paris, and then that can sometimes come at the expense of there's this perception of they're not prioritizing domestic reforms. And I think that's going to be a battle that the interim government is going to continue to fight. It's a hard one to fight because there's lack of resources, there are personnel issues, and of course, the longer that they try and achieve these different goals of normalization and rapprochement with the region and with the international community, of course, the budget is tight, sanctions are still in place, and there's a very long road ahead. I think that when we look at the role that Shabani, the foreign minister, has been playing, and of course, he has been really a case of shuttle diplomacy. He has been in Paris, he's been in Rome, they've received dignitaries, foreign ministers, heads of states from all over the world. They brought them to Damascus, which has been a pretty incredible thing to watch. We've seen a few embassies reopen. We've seen new foreign delegations come to Damascus. There definitely is a level of engagement and interest when it comes to sanctions waivers and sanctions relief. But of course, that road is a very long one, especially when it comes to one of the key players here, which is the United States government. There was a recent statement that was put out by the Department of State that I think really shows that this administration is starting to consider what this could look like, and also, of course, put out some signals for this new interim government. And I think one of the most important expectations that has been put out has been this expectation of multi-faith, cross-sectarian inclusion and accessibility in this new interim government. And that is going to be very difficult, I think, for the interim government, as we've now experienced and we've seen clashes along the Mediterranean coast in Latakia. We've seen some insecurity and clashes in the south, in Dara and in Sueda. There, of course, is a very exciting but very uncertain pathway forward with the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeast. We have this new deal. There's a year to hammer out what that deal is going to look like. As an analyst, it's very exciting because it shows that it's a step forward, unification, but also, of course, it's going to be very difficult to see how both sides will try and ensure that they retain representation and autonomy. So I think that for al-Shara, he understands that these are challenges, but the system inside of Syria, there are actors that are not necessarily necessarily on the same page. So it's going to really be, over the next really 6 months, it's going to be key for him to really put this pathway and lay his foot down and really identify that these are goals for the entire interim government to succeed.
Thank you, Caroline. We've touched on some of the agreement between SDF or the autonomous region and also Damascus. I think that's a very good, segue for our next question for Sirwan. Sirwan, you're following the northeastern Syria, very, very closely, and also you are from there. There have been some recent developments, some positive steps, as Caroline mentioned, and also we have the PKK Turkey peace process, which appears to have some positive impacts between Rojava and also Syria, and also on this and also Turkey as well. So you had SDF leader going to Damascus, March 10th agreement, followed by the Tishrin Dam agreement, and also you have the Aleppo agreement, which gave some sort of authority to the Kurds to govern their own security under different name. So how do you think these agreements will bolster but also undermine the Kurdish quest for autonomy in Syria? Do you think this could serve as a model for a bargaining process or framework for something greater in the future?
Thank you, Yvonne. It's good to be here, and it's great to be in the company of this excellent panel. I must start with this. It's been a little over 4 months since the collapse of the former regime, and I still find it, I still can't believe it. I can't get over that Assad. That Assad dynasty after over 5 decades is no more. Yeah, I think the title of this panel basically gives an idea of what looks ahead in Syria. I think, and you can also apply it to the current dynamics between the Kurds, especially the SDF and the current government in Damascus, in the sense that what's been happening since early March until this point, and especially starting with the a couple of important points in the agreement, shows that this could be an opportunity for a significant level of Kurdish autonomy or a Kurdish-led autonomy, and it could also be a way to undermine. But it really depends on what the Shara government in Damascus really wants in return of all these concessions, in my opinion, concessions that the SDF has made. You talked, Yerevan, you talked about the recent agreements in the 2 Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo, Sheikh Massoud and Ashrafia, and I think that shows how willing the SDF has been since day one, since they decided to raise the new Syrian flag on all government institutions in northeast Syria as a sign of goodwill. Shows that the other side must also make certain concessions in the practical sense of the word. Well, I should also say that the fact that the Syrian presidency and Ahmed Shara decided to keep the SDF busy for himself, opposed to all the issues related to other factions, other groups, including some who were at Shara during the offensive, and even prior to that, that those have been the purview of the defense ministry. The fact that the SDF led to be an issue that al-Shara had to carefully work on shows how precarious this has been and could be down the road. Yeah. Thank you. I hope this one works better. But it was important that the two sides early on understood that, avoiding violence is essential to keep the conversation ongoing. And I think one of the important points that was agreed upon during the initial agreement between Abdi and al-Shara was, making sure that there is a cessation of hostilities throughout the country. And I think if we were talking about some concessions that were made early on the part of the Syrian government, that was one. They looked at the SDF as a counterpart, not as a faction that had to be integrated. Of course, we detail about how this integration process of bringing the SDF into the fold of the national army and the defense ministry would work out, whether it's going to be, and of course, this has been one of the major points of contentions between the two sides, whether the SDF should be brought in, integrated as a whole or as individuals, which has been a major demand by the SDF leadership, is that you have this highly trained, highly disciplined, and well-trained, US-trained force that has been on the forefront of the war against terrorism in Syria, that can actually be an asset to the new government. And you can already tell the Ministry of Defense has been really struggling with the events that Caroline alluded to in the coast and the Alawite region, and how certain elements within the newly established army are out of control. And we can talk about this later on, but this could be an opportunity for the entire country to be able to bring the SDF into the decision-making process within the defense ministry, and allowing the group to retain its authority over the, if not the entire northeast, at least the Kurdish heartland in the north and in the northeast. Of course, SDF has been already talking about that they are in talks over the future of places, Arab-dominated areas like Deir ez-Zor and Raqqa, which is important. From a Kurdish perspective, I think the decision to go after ISIS in those areas, initially it was a controversial move within the Kurdish movement and within the Kurdish population in general, whether it was wise back then in 2016 and 15, to take on places like Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor that don't have much, that don't have Kurdish presence. And now you can show, I mean, the SDF leadership can show that it could actually be used as a bargaining chip to discuss the future of a potential Kurdish autonomy in the northwest, the actual Kurdish heartland places along the Turkish border, and I think this is what the SDF needs to build on, is that Syria, one of the factors that led to the eruption of the civil war was the fact that this country for so many years, for so long, has been heavily decentralized, and certain parts of the country were not happy with the way where things were led. And I'm not only talking about the Kurdish region, I'm talking about the entire, like the provincial part of Syria. And decentralization could be actually a remedy to some of the problems that also Caroline talked about when it comes to local governance, when it comes to building institutions that are actually representative of the local population. And so if you're talking about challenges and opportunity, a challenge in the next few months would be how to manage to integrate the SDF into the fold of the Syrian military. And an opportunity would be the existence of this highly disciplined group could be seen as an asset down the road.
Thank you, Siran. You touched on some really important, points, but you talked about how Kurds are governing some areas that are not Kurdish majority, and sometimes that's used against the Kurdish rule against these areas. And especially in this town, many people, many think tankers, analysts, they say, oh, because this is not a Kurdish majority region or city or village, therefore the Kurds have to leave. And when you look at the history of the last century, for 100 years the Kurds were governed by non-Kurds, and there was no problem. But suddenly, as soon as Kurds govern one city or one village, there's problem with that. I hope people really, think about what governance means. And also, as long as there is good governance, it shouldn't be a problem whether it's a Kurd or Arab or Turk or whatever. The problem is with how people are being governed. It's not about, the ethnic group. We as the Kurds, for example, have that problem. It was not about the system per se, or about who governed us, but also it was the system, how it operated us. General, I would like to come back to you and also zoom out a little bit to the general, to the regional level. As you know, in the past, Israel was worried about Iran, but now it appears to be more worried about Turkey. There are lots of competition between these two key allies of the United States. They had a meeting in Azerbaijan a few days ago to make sure that they would not have some sort of a directed confrontation inside Syria. Turkey enjoys a very good relationship with the current administration in Damascus. They have lots of influence. Some of the ministers even hold Turkish citizenship. And also, Turkey wants us to build military bases inside Syria, and Israel, for the right reasons, is very distrustful of the current administration inside Syria, and also very distrustful of the Turkish intentions. Therefore, it has bombed Syria about 700 times since December of last year. So, what do you think about this new competition between Turkey and also and Israel inside Syria? Do you think the underlying strategic interests between Turkey and Israel inside Syria are reconcilable, or we are going to see some sort of a proxy war between these two allies of the United States?
Yeah, thank you. That's been an excellent question. And I think the audience has heard all three of us now talk about the significance of the fall of Assad. So I'll just kick a dead horse here and say one more time that the fall of Assad is the most significant event that has happened in the region, at least over the last year. And I think with history may continue to rank very, very highly. It has fundamentally changed the facts on the ground. It's altered our assumptions, it's altered the assumptions of others in the region about security, and it has provided a pathway to both opportunities and peril, as Sirwan and Caroline have highlighted here. And it's in that third area, the pathway to opportunities and peril, where we see these two actors beginning to pay attention. I think both Israel and Turkey are appreciating the significance of this, and of course are looking after their own national interests and their own aspirations as they step into this. For their part, the Israelis are very desirous of a buffer zone. If you talk to Israelis, they will tell you that they're being attacked on multiple fronts. So the opportunity to settle a front, to create some buffer space is really, really critical to them. They are very concerned with trying to disarm Syria and make sure that the Syrian military that emerges, and certainly the militia groups that have been associated with them, can no longer be a threat to Israel. And of course, they want to be in a position where they prevent the emergence of future threats down the line, whether those are terrorist threats or nationalist threats or whatever. So I think those three things there kind of highlight what kind of constitutes Israel's interest in Syria at this particular juncture. Turkey's interests, I think, are a little broader and a little bit more expansive, at least from my perspective. I think they want, like Israel, they want border security as well. As we all know, there's been a long-term issue between Turkey and Kurds, not just in Syria, but in Iraq as well. So, creating space is important for that. They also want some space, I think, to, prevent against further instability in Turkey. So that's a key issue. they are concerned about combating terrorism as well. They have seen ISIS and what it has done, and that's played out in their country to some extent. They have seemed to have had some kind of alliance here with HTS, but counterterrorism, I think, is an interest for them. Turkey took in a massive number of refugees, so they are interested in seeing the conditions set for the reverse flow of those refugees back into Syria and back into the communities from which they came from. I think Turkey very much views that as an indication of stability. They are interested in shaping the political environment, even more so than Israel is. Obviously, they have strong relationships with the new Syrian government. And they have a very vested interest in a stable and unified Syria. So as much as they have concerns about the SDF and especially the Kurdish component of that, I think they view the alignment between the SDF and the al-Shara government as generally a positive one. They have economic interests. At some point, Syria will need to undergo massive reconstruction, and Turkish companies stand to gain in that. So there's an economic aspect of this. And I think, as everybody can appreciate, Syria has long been a location for trade and transit. And so they see those opportunities economically as well. And then finally, I think Turkey does look at this as an opportunity for regional influence, for projecting their own power and influence, and for perhaps being a check to the influence of the other Saudi power or the other Sunni power in the region, and that is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So Turkey has many more interests, I think, much more broad than Israel does. But both these countries have interests at stake. And to your question, are the interests potentially reconcilable, or are they signal the likelihood of a new phase of conflict? And I think the answer is yes and yes. This, Syria will continue to be extraordinarily complex here. These two countries have had diplomatic difficulties over a number of years. There may be a role for the United States to play here in helping to broker some of these opportunities in a more positive fashion as we move forward. But yes, I think there certainly are some opportunities for reconciliation of them. In fact, they share some similar interests, but it is likely that there will also be some conflict, and so we'll just have to see how that plays out over time.
Thank you, General. Caroline, you have been focusing on Captagon and also drug in Syria for quite a long time. You spoke at the Hills, you have produced lots of publications about this, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, even you spoke at the UK Parliament, am I right? Yes. And I would like to tie in with the issue of the foreign fighters in Syria. So what is the status of the issue of Captagon manufacturing proliferation in Syria? And what is the role of the foreign fighters, and how these two are impacting the security situation, and what are the implications for the stability in Syria?
A great question. First, before I tackle Captagon, I just wanted to quickly just follow up to a point that General Votel just made about opportunities for peace brokering. And I just wanted to say that have seen some of the developments that have transpired, specifically with the deal between Damascus and the SDF. I think CENTCOM has played an incredible role, specifically the work that General Pat Ryder has done in playing a lot of behind the scenes roles and of course helping broker and helping build confidence and build confidence building measures with both sides. And as we've seen general paralysis, what feels like paralysis in Washington, I think that as we all analyze the situation, that doesn't necessarily mean that there are no U.S. governmental agencies that are trying to change the conditions on the ground. And so I'm very excited about some of the opportunities there, and it's very nice to see that we have many agencies still actively engaged on issues in Syria, specifically when it comes to brokering peace agreements and ceasefires. Now on Captagon. I remember in December after we saw the collapse of the regime, I took a day to think about how this impacts our work. Over at the Captagon Trade Project, over at New Lines, we have an entire project dedicated to following the Captagon trade. Who is involved, the individuals and networks that are actively engaged in production and trafficking, what can be done by the United States and its partners to try and address this trade, its security implications, its healthcare implications, and whatnot. And so initially there was this assumption amongst many analysts that, okay, the regime has collapsed. This means that the Captagon trade is eradicated because the regime comprised over 80% of Captagon production. They were closely affiliated with large-scale, industrial-scale manufacturing of Captagon, to the point where at its height in 2023, Captagon was estimated to be over $10 billion, which is quite large, especially given the fact that it had grown in only just a few years. Now, in that day of reflection, I came to the conclusion, because we had conducted a lot of work the previous year, myself and my colleague, Dr. Karam Shar, and we had seen a number of surprising and interesting trends in Captagon. Number one was that seizure rates had increased, but the volume of Captagon released into illicit markets had actually decreased by a pretty considerable margin. It seemed almost like there was this huge steep dip when you would map out the volume of Captagon in circulation in the illicit markets. And what we started to see was that the regime was cracking down on some elements of Captagon trafficking, not the closest individuals, for example, family members like Maher al-Assad, Wasim Badi al-Assad, Samer al-Assad, but individuals like Amr Kiti and individuals that were within the business sector and agricultural sector of Syria. And that was really now reflecting back. Was an initiative that she took trying to achieve normalization, to try and create this impression that they were cracking down on this illicit trade. Throughout 2022 and 2023, the regime tried to engage with its GCC counterparts, and there were a series of promises made, and essentially Gulf states that were frustrated with the flow of narcotics like Captagon into their countries, made a request for Damascus to try and reduce the flow. And so 2024, that was the year that the Syrian regime didn't necessarily stop producing Captagon, but they tried to step on the pipeline of Captagon flowing into the region. Now, of course, then the regime falls in December and the curtain is pulled back. We see all of these labs filled with Captagon, filled with production equipment, and really exposing the regime's strong linkage with Captagon production. It was also very clear that while Captagon wasn't necessarily flowing at the same rate that it had in 2022 and 2023 into the region, they were still producing this. So it seemed like there was some sort of strategy to stockpile Captagon, wait till the opportune moment, potentially achieve normalization or, another step towards normalization, and then, of course, try and reroute Captagon back to destination markets. And what this did, it set up a lot of Captagon traffickers to thrive in a post-regime Syria. That's why we've seen clashes ensue in the south, right along the border with Lebanon, because these traffickers that have access to the stockpiled Captagon, they're trying to essentially joust and compete for control over these routes. Notable families like the Zaiter family, they're heavily engaged in these clashes. And because the interim government, as I mentioned in my first answer, they're struggling to maintain control over these certain groups and establish consensus in key high-level ranks of their government. They're not able to sufficiently crack down and put a stop to this violence in the south. We've also seen some very major seizures in the northeast of Syria, which shows that a lot of these traffickers are trying to export Captagon out of Syria, potentially find new routes. We've seen a surge in Captagon seized in Turkey as well as in Iraq. We've found new Captagon laboratories and seizures as far as Kuwait and Egypt. We've seen labs found in Germany and in the Netherlands. So I think when we look at the future of Captagon, how it's going to evolve from Syria, it's very clear that these traffickers are looking to diversify routes outside of the country, as well as, of course, try and find new criminal alliances that are outside former regime networks that they had.
Can you shed light whether foreign fighters or foreign elements are involved in this, protection and manufacturing or trade?
Certainly. So as many might remember, back in the mid-2010s, there was a pretty close affiliation between Captagon and the Islamic State. There were a number of seizures of Captagon in the Syrian desert, the Badia, throughout, 2011, 2015. 2016, there were many media reports that also put this very tight and close affiliation between the Islamic State and Captagon. There were rumors that, these fighters used Captagon to enhance their battlefield performance, that they took this to stay up late at night, to stave hunger, and of course to perform almost deliriously and conduct these different attacks. Now, of course, in 2018 and 2019, we started to see a shift, not only in the narrative, but also the evidence of what actors were behind Captagon production. That doesn't mean that there were no non-state and extremist actors that were still engaged in Captagon production, consumption, and trafficking. When we look to the Northwest in Idlib, there were some evidence and there were some signs that there were labs that were there, very small scale. But I think that there was a point around 2019 and 2020 where even HGS recognized the opportunity of seizing Captagon at border checkpoints and highway systems, and pointing towards Damascus and essentially ringing the alarm bell and trying to assign blame on Damascus. So we saw quite a few seizures of Captagon in the Northwest, but of course that doesn't mean that small-scale production didn't continue to ensue. And the same goes, of course, in the South, where we saw Hezbollah heavily involved in guarding many of these Captagon production facilities, sending convoys, sending even advisors and experts on trafficking from their experience with the hashish trade in Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley. And they facilitated a lot of these Captagon shipments, some of the largest Captagon shipments, in fact, in the history of the trade.
Thank you. Siron, let me come back to you and talk about the U.S. policy. I don't know if we should say policy or not, but approach. What I see is some sort of a dual approach, especially when it comes to Syria. On one hand, it encourages the Kurds, the autonomous region, to deal and have some sort of an agreement with Damascus. On the other hand, is trying to distance itself or not to deal with the current administration in Syria. So you see some sort of a strategic contradiction. So how do you think this, hesitation by the United States will facilitate or pave the way for, other actors like, Russia, Chinese to come back to Syria? Because we have already, seen the Chinese economic delegation, diplomatic engagement, happening in Damascus. We saw the Russian, economic and also energy, engagement in Damascus, which led to the phone call between, Ashara and also Putin. So can you shed light on the U.S. policy and what this mean for the country?
Sure.
And also for the Kurds, especially?
Sure. So a couple of days ago, something very important happened. A meeting in Abu Dhabi between UAE president and Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara. And I thought that was a turning point for how the region has been trying to help the new government. Al-Shara has been trying so hard. UAE was one of the last countries that congratulated al-Shara after he was appointed as interim minister, and then after he formed his government. and it was also one of the first Arab countries that normalized relations with the former regime. So the fact that the U.S. finally is on board with the, its, Gulf allies and other countries in the region is indicative of how important Syria is. Like the U.S., as General Votel said in his first answer, should see it like Syria still matters, even if it's limited to the geopolitical significance of this country. And I think the region's countries have realized, or all these regional powers have realized that this is the government that we will have to deal with. This is the individual that we will have to deal with for a long time. I stated in the past also, right after the collapse of the former regime, that al-Shara might not be a full-blown dictator in Syria, but he will remain a significant, he wields a lot of power, and he will be around for for a long time. Also, given how young he is, so the United States has a lot of many things to worry about in terms of whether it want to maintain relations with any future government in Syria. And I think whether we like it or not, whether this current administration admits that the U.S. was one of the largest humanitarian donor in the early years of the Syrian conflict, up until the focus quickly shifted. Actually, even during the war on ISIS, the U.S. remained the largest humanitarian foreign donor to the to Syria. And there's they've made a lot of investments. Like different administrations have been on different levels engaged with Syria. And to think that Syria no longer matters, it's a mess, we should be away from it, it's a mistake that many other previous administrations did with other neighboring countries in the region. And what happens is, you end up, getting withdrawn into some of these, re-withdrawn into some of these countries without really doing much. You're like, start dealing with certain countries in the region on an ad hoc basis. And the U.S. still does, in my opinion, have an opportunity to have a strong influence in, making sure that government institutions, state institutions are completely different. Because what will happen in Syria, a real major transformation. The Ba'ath regime, especially under Hafez Assad in the early years in the 70s and 80s, transformed, reshaped the state. And what needs to happen is that for these regional and international stakeholders to ensure that what Assad did 5-6 decades ago won't be repeated by a new Islamist-led government. The U.S. has influence and clout. Not just the 2,000. Now we know it's not. We thought it was 200, but now we know it's 2,000 U.S. troops that could be used as a leverage moving forward. And I think General Votel talked about it already, how these forces can be used as a way of pressing the new authorities in Damascus that inclusivity is not necessarily a threat to, even if Shara is to remain for a long time in power. It could actually benefit the stability of the country. I'll have to say something that also Caroline alluded to early on. It's been Shara's government has been very, very effective in terms of reaching out to all these countries. I mean, we're only talking about 4 months, and all these new, suddenly new interest in Syria from countries that were very, very, like, not even remotely interested in Syria during or even before the civil war. So I think that's a good thing, and that should be a sign for the United States that it has to be there, even if other countries are taking the lead. The United States still has a lot of leverage that it can use to, push the interest of, establishing a pluralistic system of governance, making sure that all minorities are represented in the government. Something I always say, and a lot of people think it's half of Syria nearly is non-Muslim, non-Arab, and that's a fact. That's a fact that this could be either an opportunity for a real representation of civil society that has been very active, by the way, in the past 14 years. Civil society has been really on the forefront of protecting, playing different roles, non-traditional roles, and part of northwest and northeast Syria. And the fact that there is still a way, like we're talking about 5 years. A lot of people think that 5 years is a long time for the transitional period. I think it's fine as long as the real things are happening. The outreach to different community has been great. The outcome, not so much. But I think by engaging other forces, other actors, the Druze in the south, the Kurds in the northeast and the north, the Alawites and others. I think that will make it a lot easier for even the new government to be able to continue its outreach regionally more effectively. And I think this is something that the United States, along with its EU allies, can achieve on the ground. Other actors that are involved in the Syrian file are not necessarily interested in making it happen.
Thank you, Sirwan. General, I think we have a little bit more time. I would like to ask you a question. I visit Kurdistan and land and fly out of Erbil almost 3 or 4 times a year. I happen to see all these C5 Galaxy and probably C17 Globemasters. I'm not a military expert, but I have no choice but to learn these names because of my son, who is sitting right here with me. He loves planes. So how important is Erbil for the U.S. mission in Syria? Can you help us understand that, please?
Yeah, I'm glad you recognize that. I think Erbil and Iraqi Kurdistan has been extraordinarily important for us. We've had a long-term relationship with them. It's important to appreciate when President Obama made the decision to go back into Iraq in 2013, 2014, when ISIS was ravaging across the Levant. It fell to me and a few others here to kind of get our forces back in there. And the first place that we went is we went to Erbil, because we knew we had relationships there that had transcended time, had transcended our departure. And as soon as we arrived on the ground, very quickly, we were able to secure space, secure security, secure what we needed to get on the ground and begin to organize ourselves for what would eventually be a 3 or 4 year campaign against ISIS, and which continues to support our operations there today. So I think this relationship, certainly from a military standpoint, I think is extraordinarily important, and I think it's stood the test of time, and so I have the highest regard for the Kurdish population really throughout the region here, but certainly for the Kurds in Iraq that have played such a critical role for us.
And probably we should go to the final question. And again, I start from you, General. So what policy recommendation would you propose for Washington engagement in Syria that can safeguard its strategic interests while contributing to the regional stability?
Yeah, thanks. Well, maybe I'll offer a virtue and maybe a couple of big ideas here. I think the virtue we have to have here is patience. And so far, the administration has been patient in terms of this, despite some of the narratives and maybe some of the proclivities that might be out there. I think it is important to see how this develops and not cut off options by preemptively making decisions because it feels good or it feels like it's politically expedient. And I think to their credit, the new administration has been patient. We should continue to be that way. I think it's important for us to appreciate that in the Middle East, we only have about 1.5, that's 1.5% of the total joint force is actually in the Middle East. It's relatively a very, very small portion. So when you talk about effectiveness, you talk about efficiency, I think this is a pretty significant and important efficiency that we are getting here by a small commitment of military forces on the ground. I think we need to be patient going forth. I think there's I think there's three big ideas that I would emphasize as we look at our policy. First is we've got to look at the long-term deterrence of Iran. That's really about the region, but it's also about Syria. There still are some remnants here that are still in the Syrian space that need to be addressed, and we need to be suppressed, that are much more loyal to Iran than they are to anybody else. That has to be taken care of. But effectively deterring Iran, and we're at a point of it right now. I think is a good long-term objective for us, and we should stay focused on that. Second thing is we have to preserve our options in the region, particularly for violent extremist organizations. I think we've all seen over the last 18 months the continued external desires of organizations like ISIS, whether it's Moscow or whether it's any of these other international capitals where we've seen attacks perpetrated. They definitely have designs on external attacks, and it doesn't take long for organizations like that to regrow. And in fact, we have an ISIS army in detention in Syria today. So we have to those that are being held in the camps, former fighters, several thousand of them. So we have to preserve our options for addressing the scourge of violent extremism down the line. And then third, we have to think and act strategically in the region. And I've touched on that a little bit earlier in my remarks here. What happens here? There is no doubt that great power competition does play out in the Middle East. We're certainly gonna see some angles of it in Syria, but we're gonna see it much more broadly across the region. So I think keeping those three ideas, I think, in the forefront of our policy formation and the development of our alternate strategy, I think, would be the things that I would be thinking about.
Thank you, Sirwan.
So just to follow up on what the general said, I think the threat of violent extremism will continue, to present itself in different ways in Syria, and an organization like ISIS has proven to be very effective in adapting to new environments, new situations, given the background and history of the current rulers in Damascus. And I think we should be like how much serious will they be willing to fight counter ISIS, or how different or similar their understanding of civilization, and especially in eastern Syria, is, because we all remember how the way the U.S. and its allies on the ground viewed, counterterrorism was completely different from how the Russians and the Syrian regime, and definitely the Iranians, saw it, in the form of ISIS. So that's really important. And as the general also said, all these like thousands of ISIS fighters, foreign fighters, and many of their families, including the vast majority are Iraqi and Syrian, how to deal with it. And I think the United States, again, needs to, remain engaged in, especially on this file, and making sure, again, going back to, the, talks between the SDF and Damascus, that the SDF remains as this force that has been trained. The SDF, by the way, has built a very sophisticated apparatus over the years. If you look at the structures that they've built within the organization itself, but also at the very local, at the very bottom, and when it comes to like security provision to different parts of Syria, northeast Syria, sorry, it should be viewed as a way that the United States can continue building on that, and in probably a different capacity now that we have a different government in Damascus. But I think these are things that the United States should see, that Syria could actually, a stable Syria is good for the entire region, but a stable Syria with a representative government with a pluralistic form of governance would ensure that this stability that everybody is looking for is really long term.
Caroline, please.
So when I think about the moment that we're witnessing in Syria, historically speaking, this is quite rare. We've seen this in post-war Germany, post-war Japan. the United States has, I think, a very unique opportunity to try and build the conditions and build the confidence on the ground to help make Syria more stable and finally achieve the vision in Syria that so many have long sought. And one of probably the joys of doing this work, it's been being able to engage and work alongside many Syrians that have sacrificed so much over the years, and getting to see them witness this new opportunity for a new Syria. That's a really special moment. And I think that in Washington, it's important that we remember that when enacting policies. And while, of course, the big question right now, it's sanctions relief. When will we get there? What will that roadmap look like? We've seen now 3 kind of very ambiguous but broad stipulations and expectations from the United States government. It's going to be very important that we keep those 3 there, and we keep communicating these expectations with the interim government. But when we look to the Northeast, as you've just mentioned, there's a lot that the United States can do, especially with the existing Operation Inherent Resolve mandate, our work with the SDF there. And as General Botel mentioned too, while of course this has been one of the most successful counterterrorism missions, I think, in history, ISIS activity is still there. And up until the regime fell in Syria, that was one of the biggest headlines, how ISIS had ramped up its activity in the Badia. Their attacks were not necessarily as sophisticated as they once were, but they're trying, and they are targeting checkpoints, they're targeting SDF locations, they are trying to target human security in the Northeast. That's where I think the United States has a degree of responsibility to uphold the mission, to try to continue to work with its partners, and to ensure that the next year, which is critical as we see this negotiation period ensue between the SDF and Damascus, that we are there to provide that buffer zone. We're there to provide that area for security and stability. And I think that it's important that we don't take our eyes off the ball, that we are there to provide the support, assistance, and resources to our partners on the ground. We continue to engage with both sides to ensure that, for example, ISIS detention centers and camps, the ball is not dropped with security there. As we've known and as we've seen through repeated jail breakout attempts, this is a goal, and they're going to try and exploit distraction and vulnerability and this space. So I think it's going to be very important for the United States to find that space and continue to be engaged.
Thank you. This was my last question. Now we are going to open the floor for Q&A. Please introduce yourself, and also we have the mic there, and probably if you don't want to stand up, probably Henza, would you kindly help with the mic? You can do that? Oh yeah, okay, so it's fine. Yeah, thank you. Please introduce yourself. And
my name is Bassam Sekar. I am U.S. representative for Syrian Democratic Council. Also, I'm American Alawite. Also, I'm representing the Alawite in the coast in Syria. Really, we are happy that the Assad's fall. It's very good things. But when I'm listening to all of you are talking about the new opportunity. I don't know if you are aware who are the new coming. They are former ISIS, former Al-Qaeda, they are HTS. All of them, they are designated as terrorist group. Plus, you should be aware, since the Assad's fall, till today, we have daily bleeding from Alawite community. In March 7, we had over 15,000 killed, civilian killed, in 48 hours. And one of these people who killed, it's 2 my nephews. I'm American. And these 2 nephews, they are civilians, 22 years and 23 years old, dentist and IT. And I couldn't understand how we will have new opportunity with these kind of people. These people, they killed American, you know that, in Iraq. These people, They dance on the street when we have September 11. And now we are talking about the new opportunity. I don't know, it's the politics, how it is. It is humanity here. I don't know, I don't know who pushed us as SDC or SDF to integrate it with the new government. You should know that the new government, they are sanctioned by US. Abu Amsha, Saif Boulad, and Hatem Shakra, they are commit also crime against Kurdish people. And they still fighting in our area in Tishreen Dam till only like 7 days ago.
Thank you. Do you have a question,
okay,
please?
okay.
Yes.
My question, please. Is it possible to have a new Syria with such like people like that who are terrorists? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course. Everything that you said about the newcomers, I think is true. Most of them. I said like every time Al-Shara in recent months has been traveling, he has to get a special travel ban exemption from the U.S. Security Council to be able to, engage with foreign leaders overseas. So I think you're 100% right. We know who these people are. But we also think, in my opinion, it's like this is the opportunity that we think is going to happen. It's like, distancing yourself from what's happening because, technically is going to be in favor of this government. You're going to bring more extremist elements within the new government, allowing others in the region to have an upper hand. Turkey, for example, could be problematic, which is why I think, in my opinion, that the U.S. needs to engage more with the new reality in Syria. I mean, your own organization, for example, was engaged for a long time. The Syrian
Our people who pushed for that.
Oh, no. I'm talking about during the, no. No, my point is like, sure. My point was that even, while, massacres were happening, Assad was committing suicide in many parts of Syria. The SDC still engaged in dialogue with the former regime, which is and also understandable because you're there, you're on the ground, you need to protect your people, your communities, the gains that were have been made over the years. So, and I think to answer your question briefly, it's like the opportunity is like if you let things happen out on their own, on their own in Syria. A similar situation to what happened with ISIS could happen, but to directly engage with the new rulers, I think you're depriving them from the you deprive the extremist element within this new elite to flourish. Can I add one more thing just to, sorry.
Yeah. Be concise, please, because
Yeah, of course. So yes, we all recognize that when, Al-Shara, when he was still called Al-Jolani, when he formed his, jihadist coalition, it included a lot of jihadist foreign fighters and a lot of Turkish-backed groups, a lot of people that Al-Jolani himself was at odds with in Idlib, people that he actually targeted in Idlib when he was governing that enclave early on. And I think this is one of the problems that Syria will have to face. And also, let's remember that it was one of the main points that the U.S. mentioned in that letter that was delivered to Syria's interim foreign minister in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, that foreign fighters should not play a role in the new government, and they were specific about 8 foreign individuals that unfortunately have been given senior positions within the new government, including the defense ministry. So I 100% agree with you that we know these people, we know where they come from, but I also believe that it's a mistake not to engage or to refrain from directly engaging with them.
Thank you. General, do you have anything to add or?
I agree with Sirwan on this. I mean, it's obviously a very difficult situation. My heart goes out to those that have suffered at the hands of this. And of course, as a military leader, we certainly have seen the impacts of this, but I think it highlights the complexities of the region that we are presented with these situations that require us to be pragmatic, even when we detest being pragmatic in these situations. And for all the reasons I think Sirwan highlighted, I think it's important to engage and try to find ways that we can move forward past this to get to a better place. It's an interim government, and that gives me hope that there is something that comes beyond all of that.
Thank you. Please, yes. Please introduce yourself, and also if your question is specific for one of our speakers, please identify them.
Hi, my name is Dina. Too short to reach. Hello, everyone. My name is Dina. I'm a graduate student at George Mason University, and I study stabilization, conflict resolution. And I have a question for the general, and also just I'd like to, gain any insights from the panelists as well about Israeli presence in Syria. So Israel invaded Syria recently, and they've taken over a buffer zone. They're expanding an already existing buffer zone. And so my question is, what are the risks to stabilize if Syria is trying to get rid of foreign fighters and any sort of foreign presence in the country? What are the risks to stabilization, one, and then two, also just for regional security as well, because there are concerns that Israel might try to not just expand the buffer zone, make it a more permanent part of Israel. They've built settlements there before. They recently canceled tours for tourists who want to visit the buffer zone. So just in general, if there are any insights about stabilization and risks to continued Israeli presence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. So, great question, and thank you for asking it. I mean, I think, to our last point here, I think Israel is thinking pragmatically about this situation, and I think their actions reflect their view of the situation and the opportunities that it has provided them to, to take measures that are really more focused on their own security and than they are for stability in Syria. I think the long-term risk of this is that long-term presence of Israeli forces in these areas, I think, could potentially undermine a more legitimate government when it arrives in Syria. And of course, how Israel is conducting their security operations on there really matters as well. It can lead to more flashpoints. It can lead to more resentment. It can lead to more marginalization of the populations down there. So I think again, this I think is going to take some time to play out, but I think Israel is acting pragmatically as they view it in their own interests at this particular time, and as whether that pragmatism is merited in the longer term, I think has to be revisited, certainly by the Israelis, but perhaps by others who are interested in the long-term security and stabilization of Syria.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
Sure.
Yeah.
Regarding these recent strikes and the encroachment beyond the Golan, I think that, trying to understand why this is happening, there was a post-2008 security arrangement between Russia and Israel that really, in some cases, held together very, very delicately some of the security dynamics in the South, particularly in Dara and Sweda. I perceive recent Israeli strikes as this reaction to that entire arrangement being completely upended. Now, the risk with this is just disrupting momentum in Syria. As I think everyone has hit on the point of, look, al-Shara, he's got a very tall order to fill in the next year. There's a lot that needs to be done when it comes to accessibility, when it comes to bringing in different voices into the government, to really lifting off from the interim governmental period to a more permanent government. And this certainly stands to potentially disrupt that. In the same way that, there were concerns about a potential Turkish offensive in the Northeast. That also, of course, could have disrupted the momentum that has been made. And also in the same way that we could see a potential ISIS resurgence in the Badia. So I think that, there are many challenges that this interim government is facing. I think now we've started started to see this very delicate and fascinating, really Turkish-Israeli dance in Syria, such as, of course, Turkey has announced that it is trying to stand up forces inside of Syria at the T4 base, for example. And as a result, there are some kind of moves of deterrence that are being made, but still, of course, these strikes continue to ensue. And right now, as it stands, the Syrian army does not have the capacity to realistically counter Israel, especially after Israel really knocked out a lot of Syria's conventional military capacities.
Thank you. I think the Sinam Khan has a question. Sorry, she was ahead. Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to ask questions now. I mean, where do you see the future of Syria if I'm introduce myself. My name is Sira Mohammed. I am the head of the mission, U.S. mission of Syrian Democratic Council in Washington. Where do you see the future of Syria if the U.S. troop withdraw before seeing an instability and before solving the problem of the camp, a whole camp, which holds more than 40,000 of the family of the ISIS, and the presence, the detainees, which we have the fighters, the most brutal fighters of ISIS, 10,000. Before solving these problems, where do you see future of Syria or the north of Syria if the troops of US, we are hearing that they are going to withdraw from Syria maybe at the end of the 2025. The other questions, where do you see Syria if we didn't see any inclusive government in Damascus? We have witnessed the government has been established one color, most of them from the HTS, and the other one also the constitutional declaration, which also did not reflect the aspiration of the Syrian people, all the Syrian people. We didn't see any representative for all the Syrian people, the ethnic, all the religious minorities in the future of the constitution or in the government in Damascus. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sinam Khanum. Probably you should have a division of labor. The first question would go to General Watel regarding the withdrawal of the US troops and what that means for northeastern Syria and also Syria in general.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question, and I have spoken about this and written about this before. That one of the principal reasons why I think United States forces have remained in North and East Syria is because of the 7,000-8,000 fighters that are still detained there, and the 40,000, 50,000 family members that are in camps in that particular area. As I mentioned earlier, those fighters represent an army in detention. It shouldn't go lost that the release of Taliban prisoners in Afghanistan a number of years ago, a lot of those fighters went back and reinforced the Taliban, and we kind of see what happened in that particular situation. So, yeah, I think this is a real concern. I do think one of the things that has to be worked out over the next year, and this again is another reason for the United States to be patient between the SDF and the interim government, is the disposition of these camps, whether they're for fighters or whether they're from family members, and how they are addressed. There are approaches I think that can be taken, but it will require a lot of work over the next year to try to minimize that risk going forward. But I think you highlight a real challenge here, and that is what happens if that problem is not solved and U.S. forces who have been backing up the SDF are no longer there to do that.
And then the questions regarding the inclusivity of governance for both.
Sure, I can. I think, yeah, the the part of the United States that the General repeatedly mentioned is important, is an important factor here, and it's how the United States needs to wait and see how things play out, including the list of demands that the United States has presented to the interim government. Just see, like, sir, Al-Shara and his, ministers have been saying all the right things when it comes to inclusivity, when it comes to protecting minorities throughout the country, but it hasn't actually happened, especially with the massacres that took place in the Alawite region. That was something that probably the United States had to think again about whether how long it should remain patient to engage with that. And I think just to Sina Khan, to your point about the constitutional declaration, just briefly. First of all, I consider it as a mini constitution. If you compare it to other declarations that emerged after the Arab Spring, Tunisia and Egypt, especially as examples, I think this one is much more it's much more inclusive when it comes to the articles and clauses that were inserted into it. And I think that was for us who've been watching this for a long time, a sign that it's going to be a tough battle, down the road when it comes to drafting a permanent document for the countries. Certain things that a lot of people on the ground wanted to see in that document, it did not happen. So it will be really interesting to see whether the recent engagements with, for example, the Druze in the south or the agreement with the SDF, how much of that will change the thinking that goes into formulating a permanent document for the country.
Thank you, Sirwan. Do you have anything, because we have very limited time, and I know that General Votel has to go as well. Thank you. Okay, so would you please, yes, probably this will be our last question because 3:30 and also General Votel has to go. Sorry for.
Yeah, hello, and thank you very much for a great lecture. I try to keep it very short. My name is Mina. I'm an international development practitioner working with civil society in mostly Middle East. So we mentioned the power competition in the region, and I have an understanding that there is a relation between power competition and stability in Syria. And also I have an assumption that in the past over a decade, many of the key actors in the region have been benefiting from the chaos in Syria, including Iran, Turkey, even Israel and USA.
Would you please ask your question?
What do you think that the current regime tendency will be in the near future to actors like Iran? And if you agree with my assumption, what do you think that the policymakers should do in order to keep Syria immune from those power competition and using Syria as a battleground?
Do you want to go ahead, Carl?
I think that when we look at Syria and really the region at large, there's an important rule to remember. It's that quiet doesn't necessarily mean that there's no activity whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And while, of course, we've seen the narrative that Iran-backed actors have completely left the region, a similar narrative to, for example, the Captagon trade. This is completely eradicated, it's wiped out. Certainly, their influence has been knocked down quite a few pegs. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are not strategizing for what space they can make in Syria and how to exploit this entire security landscape. There's that same role with Russia. While, of course, they're harboring the Assad family in Moscow, that doesn't mean that they are not making moves with Damascus at this very moment. For example, they've retained a few bases. And in some of the violence that took place along the coast, many community members fled to these Russian bases, seeking refuge and seeking safety. And I think that shows, and it shows just still how influential these positions, these officials have in the country. And I think that just because it's been quiet on that front, it doesn't mean that these actors aren't strategizing and making moves for what is to come. And I think that the role of China has been mentioned. We're starting, for example, this past week, we've seen a deal from Saudi Arabia. They're starting to participate in Syria's reconstruction. We're starting to see all of these external actors descend on Damascus to try and figure out what piece of the pie, so to speak, they can get and what role they can have in the reconstruction process, as well as, of course, geopolitically in Syria. And so it's important for the United States to monitor that.
Caroline, and we are concluding our panel because I know that General Vaughn has to go. Thank you very, very much for joining us from Minnesota. I'm really grateful for your time, for being with us. It was a really great pleasure, and hopefully we're going to have you with us in person in some other time. General, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. And can I just make one final comment here? I know there's a lot of students in the room today, and I'm well aware of the reputation that American University has in its international affairs and developing people with the statecraft skills here. And I just want to highlight that, at least on my screen, the quote over on the right-hand side of my screen and on the right-hand side there by President Eisenhower about the importance of the areas in which you are studying. We are going to need really good people. It's as Syria highlights, it's a really complicated world out there. And as a military practitioner, the military is one tool, and we need a lot of other tools in our kit bag, and you are working very, very hard on those. So I want to encourage you to kind of stay the course and focus on that. We're always going to need people that are great communicators that can express, our wonderful ideals on the world stage and can work with our partners in many, many places. So I just want to encourage our young people that are in the room today who are studying this art to really pay attention to it. It's really important for us. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for your great advice. Thank you so much. And also my deep appreciation for you, Sirwa, and also Caroline as well, for spending the time and your deep insights with us today. Thank you for all of you for joining us. It was really great and honor to moderate this panel, and I hope that it has been useful for all of you. Thank you.